Northern Shoshone are Shoshone of the Snake River Plain of southern Idaho and the northeast of the Great Basin where Idaho, Wyoming and Utah meet. They are culturally affiliated with the Bannock people and are in the Great Basin classification of indigenous people. Language. Northern Shoshone is a dialect of the Shoshone language, a central Numic language in the Uto-Aztecan language family. It is primarily spoken on the Fort Hall and Wind River reservations in Idaho and Wyoming, respectively. Bands of Shoshone people were named for their geographic homelands and for their primary food sources. Mountain Shoshone bands, Agay-Deca or Agay-Deca, Tukudeca or Tukudeca, sheep-eaters, mountain sheep-eaters, living in the Blue Mountains of northeastern Oregon and southeastern Washington, along the Salmon River Mountains, in the Sawtooth Valley surrounded by the Sawtooth Range, Upper Payette River, in the Bitterroot Mountains and Beaverhead Mountains in Idaho, and in the Wind River Range in western Wyoming. They also travel north toward the Upper Beaverhead Drainage and the Upper Yellowstone River in northern Wyoming and southern Montana. The Tukutika bands living in the Wind River Range and the Yellowstone River region settled with the main body of eastern Shoshone onto the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming. Later the Tukutika bands living in the Yellowstone River region settled with the main body of eastern Shoshone onto the Wind River Reservation. The majority joined the northern Shoshone as part of the Lemya Shoshone. These were also known as Doyaniabana Itiduyani. Northwestern Shoshone bands, Kamatika or Kamudeka, Snake River, Great Salt Lake, living from a base on Bannock Creek and Arbonne Valley. They claimed lands extending from Raft River to the Portneuf River and Portneuf Range in northern Utah and southern Idaho. The territory took in part of the Fort Hall Reservation when it was established in 1867. In 1873, the three major Bannock Creek bands moved to the reservation at Fort Hall. A small group went to Wind River, possibly synonymous with Hokanduka or Hukandeka. Painquidika or Pangwidika ranged from McCammon to Bear Lake along the Bear River and Logan River in the border region between Idaho and Utah, and on over to the Continental Divide. Cache Valley Shoshone was a band of eastern Shoshone ranged into Idaho and Utah with the major base in Cache Valley, called in Shoshone, Suhuba-Orgoy, Willow Valley, not far from the later Wyoming border. They were practically wiped out at the Bear River Massacre, January 29, 1863, by Colonel P.E. Connor's California Volunteers, followed 2 months later by a similarly destructive campaign by Jefferson's Standofers Placerville Volunteers against the Shoshone at Salmon Falls. This fight led to a series of Shoshone and Bannock treaties affecting Idaho, as well as the Tool Valley Band of Goshute of the western Shoshone. Weber Utes, a Shoshone band farther south along the Weber River to the Great Salt Lake in Utah, because having intermarried with neighboring Camumba Band of Utes, they speak the same dialect as the other northwestern bands with a slight Ute accent, and were therefore usually called Weber Utes, but they speak Shoshone and a primary of Shoshone stock, were overlooked in the treaty-making process and never got a reservation. Fort Hall Shoshone bands, Bohoniha-Pookwi, mixed Shoshone-Bannock band, living in southeastern Idaho on the Snake River Plain, in the Wind River Range, Salmon Falls on Snake River and wintered in the vicinity of the trading post Fort Hall, but also claimed the Camas Prairie as home. Later called Fort Hall or Shoshone or Show bands, also considered part of the Eastern Shoshone bands. Western bands of northern Shoshone, Jafandika or Yafintika, Boise Shoshone. Among the early mounted Shoshone bands, they traveled over a considerable range by the beginning of the 19th century, with the main hunting lands along the lower Boise River and Payette River. When Donald Mackenzie developed the Snake Country fur trade after 1818, the most prominent of the Boise Shoshone, PM, became the most influential leader of the large composite Shoshone band that white trappers regularly encountered in the Snake Country. PM served as the most important Shoshone spokesman at Mackenzie's Great Peace Conference on Little Lost River in 1820, and figured conspicuously in Shoshone affairs when Alexander Ross and Peter Skeen Ogden led the Snake Expedition later in the decade. Bruno Shoshone were not organized into bands, occupied southwestern Idaho, mainly south of Snake River along the Bruno River. When the gold rush to Boise Basin brought settlers in after 1862. After the Treaty of April 12, 1866, went unratified, the Fort Hall Reservation was set aside partly for them. Later in 1877, the Duck Valley Reservation was established in the lands. Wisa Shoshone Shoshone lived along the lower Wisa River to New Plymouth. This country was called Shoshone Willow, KKI, willow striped by the Shoshone, some of whom resisted placement on the Mala Reservation, finally settled at Fort Hall and on the Duck Valley Indian Reservation. Tribes and reservations. The northern Shoshone have people who are members of 3 federally recognized tribes in Idaho and Utah. Duck Valley Indian Reservation, Idaho, for the western Shoshone Northern Paiute Tribe. Shoshone Bannock tribes of the Fort Hall Reservation of Idaho, 544,000 acres in Idaho. Lemhi Shoshone with the Bannock Indians, a Paiute band with which they have merged. Lemhi Indian Reservation in Idaho. This reservation was closed and the people relocated to Fort Hall Reservation, where they are counted with the Shoshone Bannock peoples. Northwestern Band of Shoshone Nation of Utah.